everybody. Good evening. Thanks for joining us here. So, we've got a special guest this evening. As you know, before we get into that, I want to just remind everybody check out phoneboothpodcast.substack.com where you can subscribe and get access to a bunch of hidden content um, that you bonus content that you don't get on the normal streams that go off every week. But as you know, there's the Phone Booth podcast on Mondays. Here's the Thing podcast on Tuesdays at 6 p.m. There's Philosopher King at 7 here. Thank you for joining us today. And then, of course, the live stream on Saturday evening where we go live, the four of us, and just have a blast talking about anything and everything under the sun that's vibing that week. So without further ado, one of the ladies who I met through the Phone Booth Boys. We had a great conversation a couple weeks ago about, and it was a morning spaces, I think it was, if I remember correctly. And she stepped up and challenged me a little bit on the Catholicism thing. And so I said, hey, let's talk about it. And so here we go. So without further ado, we're going to talk about Catholicism and other things, not limiting ourselves, but just seeing where the conversation takes us. So without further ado, here's Brooke, also known as Sacred Clowns. Welcome to the
Dun,
show.
dun, dun,
How are
dun.
you? Thanks for joining me.
We've had just a great day together because like you came into the Twitter space earlier and it was nice, and then you just dropped some stuff on me because I was ready to come in here like and then you came in and was like, hey, I such and such, when you dropped you were like silent, and like I was just like, oh, wow, this guy's like hard in the paint. And then to find out that you returned to the motherland, so to
Mm-hmm.
say, it's
Yeah,
quite the chasm. And I'm a girl of paradox,
there you
so
go.
it's going to be exciting to hear more, and then also, just talk about the paradox of both of us and the Catholics.
Yeah. So, I mean, do you prefer Brooke or Sacred
Brooke's good.
Clowns, or what do you
Yeah,
get?
Brooke. I'm Brooke.
Perfect. Um, so Brooke, so yes, so it'll be great in case you guys haven't caught the cast before or whatever. Something to just fill you in on what she was referring to earlier today. We had a brief conversation in Spaces again, and I shared that I was actually in a Catholic monastery studying to be a priest, and I had vows of poverty, chastity, obedience, and silence for 6 years. So and that is surprising, especially when you see me with the boys on Saturday yapping away that I could keep my mouth shut for 6 years probably surprises a lot of people. So there you go. So, and yeah, and I did leave the church for a while, especially as I shared earlier today. There was that situation where I was supportive of a person who had been um, the victim of sexual predator, and I helped support him through running a complaint up the chain, so to speak, and having a trial opened and all kinds of traumatic stuff for him. But it ultimately was a victory because that parish priest was then put into a permanent retreat center where he would have no contact with the public and everything. So, and technically, nothing he did was illegal necessarily because even though the consent was coerced, you can't really prove it. And so it's just kind of one of those things where, but then I became the victim of attack of retaliation by his associate pastor, who then figured out that I was the guy who was the emotional support for the victim who had the strength to come forward. And I lost everything. All the people in my community, the Catholics who I knew, loved, and trusted, who came over to my house every week. I had like kind of an open house on Sunday afternoons just for like fellowship. It's such a overused and cheesy word, but it was just for building community. And all of those people who I welcomed into my home week after week after week, all of them just believed this associate pastor who had basically told them that Jonah has a dark. Let me see if I can get the quote correctly. Jonah has a dark presence, and his his words have a dark, piercing power that can penetrate the heart and turn you away from God.
Oh God.
So they all stopped talking to me, and I know for at least one person, he had actually said, "You can come to this parish, or continue talking to Jonah, not both." So it was
Yuck.
really crazy controlling. Yeah. So
Yeah.
for obvious reasons, I backed away completely from the entire Catholic community for a long
I mean, the fact of the matter is like there's so like I that's what like they don't. First of all, I'm sorry, but I think that if you do some of the things that these priests have done to lots of children. You don't
time.
deserve to live on a little freaking, I don't care if it's like you don't eat that much. You don't deserve to live on the property. You don't deserve, you deserve to go to jail because you were trusted more than anybody.
Hmm.
These guys
Hmm.
are worse. They're worse. They were trusted more than anybody. They don't deserve it. The fact that this is constantly, whether it's paid off, whether it's underneath if it's underneath everything, it's not okay. And this is the sorcery of the Catholicism, because they get you to the point to where you have to have such tolerance that you're like, okay, and you've been indoctrinated, just like NASA, where how long it took you to
Hmm.
let go. It's
Hmm.
this hold on where you sit there and you hold on and you say, oh, but the Catholic Church and all this other stuff. No, it's not okay. It's not good. It's
Well,
terrible.
and as a man with a very strong protective instinct myself, if I were to hear even allegations of a priest for against a child, the only reasonable thing to do would be to remove him completely from any contact with anybody whatsoever. The fact that they're moved from parish to parish or school to
No,
school
it's sickening,
tells
and
me
it's
it
sickening.
it tells me that the bishops making those decisions were also of that disposition, and
And
therefore
how do
the
they learn it?
archbishops all the way up to the pope, all of the same mind.
It's passed down. It's passed down from one to one to one to one. I
Hmm.
personally believe that there's initiations involved in it, and there's a whole secret sick thing that goes on underneath it all that we don't know about. If you go and look into like, the like what they talked about in the occult about the sodomy and like going into
Hmm.
portals and stuff like that, if you're really down the rabbit hole on the conspiracy theory and like how this Christ consciousness in a sense has been time shared down millennia that has to
Hmm.
do with sexual assault. And it
Yeah,
happens. And you get these people, just like you want to talk adrenochrome, those priests are guilty of fracturing millions and millions of people. And it's celebrated.
I
It's
know.
celebrated and it's disgusting.
F. Jamieson, thank you for that comment. Is my volume a little bit better now? I moved a little closer to the mic. Also, I'll blame it on the years of silence in the abbey and the as a monk that I tend to talk very softly. um, but yeah, no, and so it's true. And also, have you ever read the book? It's called The Broken Cross. I forget the author's
No, but I'm
name.
gonna put that, I will put that on my my to-do list. But
Reading that was a huge watershed moment for me, and that was when I wept for the church for the first time in my life, because for me that was hugely eye-opening in terms of realizing that what I thought and what I believed that I saw in front of me was not what it was. And just kind of mourning the loss of a mother, almost, I mean, in a sense, right, because the church is mother. And so that for me was um, a huge break, in
and
terms of kind of waking up.
well, I mean, and that's the level of sorcery. Once again, it's the level of sorcery. And if you notice, also within the Catholics, it teaches you constant ritual, constant ritual, constant ritual, constant ritual. And as you do those rituals, you're opening up your brain to be pliable to sit there and more indoctrination. And those messages go, and those thoughts come in like, oh
Hmm.
God, yeah, this is great. And then you do this, and then all of a sudden you turn a blind eye, turn a blind eye, turn a blind eye. The fact that they keep covering it up and covering up, the fact that there's class action lawsuits and they paid it out is a problem. It's
Yeah,
not okay.
yeah, 100%. Yeah. And so it's interesting too, for me, one of the things that kind of started brought me back to looking at the church and trying to understand what went wrong and when was, for me, I went with my fiance at the time down to New Orleans. Her and her daughters wanted to go for Halloween, and I that seemed crazy to me because why would you go to a crazy city on one of the craziest days of the year, especially in terms of like one of the black magic hubs, the voodoo hubs of the country. But they wanted to go, and I didn't want to let them go alone, so I went. And what really struck me is um, seeing all of the costumes. The only religion that was mocked, hands down, the only religion that was mocked was Catholicism. Bishops, nuns, priests, Jesus and the cross, the Blessed Virgin, all of those things were the only things that were mocked. And so for me, I kind of took back, like, I didn't see any Mohammeds. I didn't see any Buddhas being mocked. I didn't see any Hindu gods being mocked. The only one being mocked, so the only one that the enemy wanted to mock was Catholicism. And so then for me, it begged the question, looking at Rome today and some of the stuff that I witnessed when I was out there, all the lace and the doilies and the corruption and the endless food and wine, like fortunately when I was personally was in Rome, I didn't see I wasn't privy to any of the sex abuse stuff, fortunately. That was waiting for me back at the States when I returned, right? But the thing that for me, seeing that uh, that seeing that reality today, which is clearly evil that we've been talking about, and then reconciling that with, okay, well, so how can it be true that the enemy hates this reality called Catholicism, or seems to, from my experience and what I saw, and then how can that be also tr- uh, if what we see in the corruption in Rome today, how can those both be true? That's why, like, I really connect with a lot of Protestants or a lot of non-Catholics who are like, the Catholic Church is the whore of Babylon, and I'm like, yes, and they're like, but you said you're Catholic, and I'm like, yes, asterisk, right? So,
Cognitive
um,
dissonance, but we'll get there.
right. Well, so what? Well, so, so what's interesting, and so you're familiar with Alice Bailey, I would imagine.
Yes.
Okay.
Be
So
careful. Yeah.
the
I know this is my topic.
the book, the externalization of the hierarchy, right?
Yeah.
She speaks explicitly about the intention to. She says, they tried multiple times to overthrow Rome, and they couldn't establish their occult rule over the earth unless they got rid of the obstacle, the one who was standing in the way, which was the Pope in Rome. And so they tried for, and she kind of recounts in there, they tried for millennia or centuries at least, to infiltrate and overthrow. But every time, and there's multiple times through history where a pope had tried to change something or radicalize something or change the text of scripture, none of that was successful, because the moment that they put one of their men in the seat of Rome, he was either struck dead before he could promulgate whatever heretical deceitful thing that he was trying to promulgate, or he had a conversion and then refused to actually carry out the Masonic slash occult
Yeah.
aims, right? And so she actually stated in there, what we need to do is sell the whole world, let a pope be elected so that he will have the grace of the sacrament, I mean, of the grace of the office and the protection of the Holy Spirit
Mhm.
to not lead the church into error as Christ promised. But we need to suppress him so that the world, and then put one of our own men who doesn't have the grace of the office, but one of a man who will follow our designs, but the whole world has to believe him and follow him as if he were the Pope.
Mhm.
And so, and that's where for me, 1958, as far as I understand, that was the big break when they were successful, because with the election of John the 23rd, who then instituted all these reforms, started changing scripture, teachings of the church, all the sex scandals started blowing up everything. The entire downward spiral began in 58. So
Okay.
there were
I
issues
mean,
before
well,
that,
hey,
obviously.
hey, well, first of all, you know, a lot of the occultists, first of all, they're all theosophists. Okay. And if
Correct.
you understand Rosicrucianism and you understand the theosophists and you understand the Renaissance, you understand philosophy, all this stuff, it's
Mm-hmm.
Hermeticism. Okay. Number one, once you stay into natural law, they bring in the natural law and then they bring in the magic and they let you break it down because you're like, oh, hey, since we're here and we're basically, uh, learning this stuff, right? But
Mm-hmm.
listen to me. At the end of the day, magic exists, no matter which way you want to look at it,
Mm-hmm.
and it might be, um, you know, another language. I like to call it magic, but
Mm-hmm.
it's proven time and time again that there's laws that exist, and there's ways, if you are educated, that you can learn how these laws work and you can manipulate reality, and that could equal like dropping seeds within your
Mm-hmm.
flock to get you to think, because the first hermetic principle is all is mind versus mental. They understand that we are living in a holographic biological experience, that we are shooting out this thing right here, right? We are creating this reality together. All of us are creating this reality together, and it was hidden. So you had the Knights Templar,
Mm-hmm.
right? That had to carry this information, and all it was is Gnostic texts. All it is information that basically we are creating our reality. Okay, we are creating it. And what did the Catholics do? What did the Romans do? What did the Whore of Babylon do? The Whore of Babylon said, we have to create salvationism. We have to create it, because when you create it, it's going to create this duality in your brain. You're going to create fear. And what it is you're creating chemicals that are dropping into your hormones, that are
Mm-hmm.
creating your vibration and your render to allow you to attract. So you can't sit there like all these people, law of attraction, or why is synchronicities happening? Why is all this stuff happening? It's because your frequency is at a point where it's bringing it into you. But this is how people lived. People didn't even, speaking of you being silent for 6 years, people communicated completely different. Okay. Even the English language it's a bastardized amalgamation of dissonance. Okay. They
especially
created this
especially
to low.
American English.
Exactly. You create that language to sink and anchor and lower the frequency. And when you're lowering your frequency, you're pliable. You're so pliable to be scared and fear of the devil and all this other stuff. Like it, it's we're getting into a point right now where it's going to be so much to the point where it's just such common sense of what happened and where everything went wrong historically, and where
Mm-hmm.
how everything got put together, because we are so blind. The veils are finally looking behind the curtain, and so many
Mm-hmm.
people are scared to look behind the curtain, because their little ideas, it's not their fractures, it's their generational curses and limiting
Yeah.
beliefs that are going to get dissolved, because you were most likely religiously abused, and most people have been religiously abused, and that's why
Well,
they hold on so deeply to the lies that they've been told. And we've been told so many. So you can't sit there and say, "Oh, NASA lies. This person is terrible." All this other stuff without understanding. 325 Council of Nicaea was the beginning of a whole MK Ultra. Okay.
well, see that I mean that I disagree with, because I feel that what happened, from my understanding historically, from what is that, you know, if Jesus was the Son of God, right? If he was God, the incarnate Word, as John says, the Word became flesh, right? So if that's true, and he appointed 12 apostles that followed him more closely, and gave them certain indications of how to carry forward. And then even at the end of the Gospel of John, it says, well, if I was to try to write everything that happened in these days, the world itself couldn't contain the books, that could be written. So it kind of humorously, to connect that to the whole flat earth concept, if it's not a firmament above with a finite limited space to the atmosphere around us, then saying the whole world would be filled doesn't make any sense, because, you know, how infinite is space, right? So obviously he could be rhetorically speaking, whatever, fine. But I think what's interesting is as throughout history, as different movements have risen up, and different errors parting from what the incarnate word taught, as things came up that were deceiving and getting people pulled away from the truth, then they were there was the idea was condemned and corrected so that people would know where the truth was. And so obviously people still have the freedom to follow it or
Dude,
not.
sorry. Well, I mean, I have, first of all, I appreciate that you hold on so hard. Okay. But after 325, you had like literally you were given 10 years to convert. If not, you would die. And, or, and these were only the people that were able to be like, I would say, magi, that were illuminated to truth, right? These were
Well,
the pagans. These were like people that were like in the know of the reality in nature and the reality of this simulation. Okay. And then you had them completely begin duality of the mind of the masses with bringing in the, if you do this, then this. Okay. And then, but if you I mean, as time, and then it became literacy. Like most people were just telling people down and down and down and down, it was telephone line for a long time.
so 325 was primarily about, at that time, Arianism was really rising in the
Yes,
world, right? Which was
correct,
challenging the
correct,
divinity of Christ.
cor-
And
correct.
the
But
primary
but
purpose of Nicaea was to give guidance to people who were confused by very eloquent preachers who were saying that Christ was not divine. And so the
it
primary
wasn't.
purpose was
But
making sure that that truth was clearly indicated so that people would know, oh, okay, this is a deception that's saying Christ was not divine, right?
no, but that's not true. Because what it was is Arianism was keeping on the understanding of the matrix as a whole and the whole aspects of almost the sense of simulation, because we are all creating it as the one, just like Aristotle, Plotinus, Socrates, everybody in Greek philosophy. And we have to understand that the Septuagint, right? That was the first aspect of
Mm-hmm.
information to be passed down, right? So now you have but you have, they literally input, they inputted salvationism, and the only way that you were going to get through salvation was through the bishops, through the, like at that point it was just all the bishops. Okay, you got to Jesus through the cracker on the Jesus cracker, and the Jesus cracker came because only the priest or only the bishop had the power of Christ, which is insane to be
Well,
that full of hubris, to
yeah.
have this, ability. And then after the aspect of power that this has happened, and then that power to grow like a parasite that killed millions of people. I mean, millions of people, like, like over I'm not saying millions of people died in the crusades, but just think about
Mm-hmm.
how many people died in the crusades because of this hubris and power hungry baloney.
See, I don't see it that way. And just a comment you made earlier about you appreciate how hard I hold on. The reason
Yeah.
why I share my story about how I walked away, and it was my understanding of Greek philosophy and thought, Aristotelianism especially, ended up bringing me back because of the continuity between that and Thomistic theology, which has been that was the backbone of Catholic theology until 1958. Everything was seen. They used the terminology that Aristotle gave us for the very precise philosophical concepts that Aristotle gave us, and then St. Thomas developed and kind of showed how they go perfectly with, and giving even to the point of, for example, in the Septuagint that you mentioned, um, which was something of a miraculous translation of the old Hebrew texts, right? Where the 70 elders got together, that's where the word comes from. And they were all commissioned for the Library of Alexandria
Mm-hmm.
to translate the Hebrew scriptures to. So all these
Mm-hmm.
rabbis got together. This is
Mm-hmm.
long before Christ. and
Mhm.
said basically, okay, well, I want a copy of the sacred text for the Library of Alexandria, make it happen. And they all went, okay, well, it's going to take too long of quibbling and arguing over translations and everything. So let's all just go to our separate little porticos or rooms and translate all the way through. And then when we come back together in a year's time or however long it took, I don't remember, they came back together, all 70, and they compared text, and word for word, letter for letter, all 70 were exactly the same. So that's why it's understood and referred to as the only inspired translation of a sacred text, because basically all of the New Testament was written in Greek. So even the Latin is a translation, so human error can enter. Even the English is a translation, obviously. So there's some level of imperfection at the very least, if not downright corruption, right, in the
But I mean,
translation of the scripture.
how do you know that like that could be some kind of passed down story of bringing validity to it, that this was a divine miracle and all that
Oh,
stuff?
could I
You
mean
know,
it could
all,
you
I
could
mean,
make that
like first of all,
argument.
the Catholics, everybody. First of all religious hierarchies are infamous for lying. They're infamous for everything. You know, so
I
like
would
all of a
agree with
sudden we just
you.
like
Yeah.
we like give example of like because Constantine was a nightmare. All right, all the most of those people back in the day were legit not good people, but we give them so much validity for their
Well,
opinion and how they did something. We put that as canon, and if you walk away from it, you're blasphemous. If you don't blindly believe this garbage, you are it's awful.
so that's where consistency of logical consistency of thought. Just like, for example, I can't. I haven't spent years in medical school, but when someone tells me that I need an experimental jab for a flu, I know logically their arguments don't hold. Right? I can tell logically when there's a problem, and therefore I can choose. Then I can see through the lie more easily because there's no logical consistency. So one thing that I think it's important for everybody to remember is that the same people who lied to us about the form of the earth, the same people who lied to us about World War II, amongst other things, the same people who lied to us about all this stuff are telling us things about early Christianity and early
Mhm.
Catholicism that and demonizing people who may or may not have been so. So just like you can say, well, how do you know these people were good? Well, how do you know that they were wicked? Right? Because both of us are working off authority at some point, right? So the thing that I would say
Do you
is
justify death?
there's there's well, so we can get back to that in a second. But just like with the Septuagint translation of the Septuagint, for example, that story of how that came to be was in the ancient Greek records, Library of Alexandria records, tradition of disinterested parties. Like, for example, when I was trying to understand whether or not it was true, as some flat earthers claimed, that you could see the Chicago skyline across Lake Michigan, the first thing I did was went to a disinterested party, someone who's not trying to make a claim
Yeah,
one way or another, a
yeah,
tourist who was like, "Oh, look at that beautiful skyline. I'm on the dunes over in Michigan." Right? That to me holds more authority because there's no
yeah.
ulterior motive. Right? So for me, similar with similar with the idea of the Septuagint, a lot of disinterested parties who didn't have any investment personally in Judaism at the time were just telling a story of how this text came to be. Right? So since we have records of historians and other people who had no ties or no reason to believe Judaism, they all, when you have multiple records of that, that to me lends credibility to the claim, right? And also the fact that in the recent 50 years, 60 years since 58, as I was saying, that truth that I just shared has been completely suppressed. To go to your question about do I support death? What people The Crusades have been demonized as same with the Inquisition, which we can talk about in a second too, because I'm sure you'll want to.
What
But
about? I mean, but what about like like all? It's just been all like pagan. I mean, it's not. It's all of it. It's all of it. Was 10 years. You had 10 years to convert, and if you didn't, you faced consequences. A lot of times, that consequence was were death.
well, so I don't know about that. I have not heard that before, that they were given a 10 year timeline to convert. That that seems strange to me.
Go research it.
But in terms of the Crusades, which you mentioned, right?
Yeah.
What people, what people who are trying to demonize true Catholicism, which was suppressed in '58, as you know, that's my opinion, right?
Yeah.
Um, People who are trying to demonize all of history of Christianity, they will claim that the Crusades were terrible. Well, what they neglect is what we're seeing in Europe now, with the Mohammedans flowing in to conquer and overthrow Christian Europe, is the same thing that was happening for a century leading up to the Crusades. The Crusades were a defensive countermeasure to push, first of all, push the Mohammedans out of Europe, to push the people who were trying to tear down the established Christian order and retake the Holy Land, which was historically from the time of
Mhm.
Christ a place of holiness and a place where Christians could go pilgrimage, etc. So it wasn't like power hungry kings and popes and bishops were like, let's go slaughter innocent people in order to increase our power. Now, were there some people like that? Absolutely. Throughout in every institution, organization, or group of people, anywhere, everywhere, because we are all broken and fallen, there are corrupt, wicked people who try to serve themselves rather than the people that they pretend to serve, or the God that they pretend to serve, right? Like that story I started with, that the guy who was preying on the youth in his parish, he himself was serving himself, not the God he claimed to worship. And that's like one of my favorite quotes in the beginning of the phone booth podcast. Like, Ted's line about, I don't believe anything from these people down to the God they claim to worship. Right. That's really important to understand. Again, that logical consistency is this person's actions in line with what they're claiming to believe. And oftentimes it's not. Right.
No, yeah, I, 100. I say, do their carpets match their drapes for comedic? And a lot of times they don't. Like most people, but we have been forced into now a world right now where in order to be heard, you have to grift, and like it's like we have to figure out like this art of the grift, but we need to also then focus of like the power of the voice and coming together,
Mm-hmm.
and it's this, I think what is so upsetting to me is the fact that we could really like wake people up more if we work together, but everybody's all about an individual look at me. Like we're
I
going through
know.
this like
I
dark
know.
night of the soul of narcissism, and it's, listen, it's in every community, and if like
Yep.
it's sad. It's so sad that we have so many tools right now to really like bring information to a point, primary sources, secondary sources, and then just
Mm-hmm.
critical thought, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
show people. We are able to do that right now to awaken so many people to realize all this stuff. But guess what? Pride, which all these evangelicals or all this whatever, they just say it's okay. Pride is okay. Pride is fine.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that
and
to
it's
me is
interesting
disgusting.
that you mentioned the evangelicals, because there's an element of pride there in the rank and file that's different than the rank and file Catholicism, at least historically, in the sense that each and every one of them deems their own ability to understand and interpret divine truths is greater than anybody else's. So there's a level, rather than seeking to learn from others and seeking to put on the mind of Christ, so to speak, and become more docile to the truth and understanding of what truth is and why, and look for that and try to understand that logical consistency. Without that, there's a lot of pride there, a lot of hidden pride.
It's and pride's the worst. And then it's, once again, at least thank goodness for the events that these elites are doing to cause the fracturing of the mind, because like in my opinion, we like the dark enlightenment especially
Mm-hmm.
are the technocrats who are just so awake because they spent so much time learning and reading and understanding. They had the privilege to be
Mm-hmm.
able to study philosophy. They were able to go down the
Mm-hmm.
rabbit hole. In addition, their IQ scores are really high. So they are
Mm-hmm.
able to consume information where the atypical person has to work insane amounts of jobs, or the family, they have to like not even, they're not even able to get through all the childhood trauma that they have to be able to have rational thought. And then what do we have? Bread and circus, right? So
Yeah.
now we have bread and circus that this person is this, or they're reading their Facebook and they're reminiscing about like, oh, look at that person, or what a me, and they got us in it, they got us sucked in, that people can't
Yeah.
even get into critical thinking, right?
Well,
And then
and
the
that's
awake community doesn't even really understand critical thinking because of pride, because they're so right. We're so right. And they don't even want to open their minds to being able to understand how they're not.
well, and that's like the biggest for me. What I see as the biggest danger of AI, because obviously AI is a tool. So it is whatever it is in the hands of whoever. It's just like Jack the Ripper versus a surgeon. One damaged and destroyed life and took it away, and the other gives it or helps is assisting in the restoration. Right. So similarly, AI is just a more powerful tool than a scalpel.
We need it. We're
Hundredfold.
dumb. People are dumb.
But my concern is, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this too. Is that with the advent of AI and the chatbots and as they get more sophisticated, they're taking over critical thinking for people. So people just ask a question, and rather than themselves going through the mental exercise of looking for logical consistency, okay, well, I need to figure out this, so I need to research this. Well, okay, now I have another little breadcrumb. Where could I find out more about that? Right. So instead of having that exploratory, curious mindset of research and critical thinking. Now it's just, hey, tell me XYZ. And now, just like our ability to follow uh, directions and or remember how to get to mom's house, right? This is an example I love to use. Now people just follow the blue line. So if mom's house is more than a couple blocks away, good luck if the internet's down. Most people would have a hard time remembering how to go here or there, right? Because that directional intelligence, so to speak, or know-how has atrophied. And so now I fear that the generations growing up now are going to be so used to not having to critical think because ChatGPT is just giving them the answers. They're
Totally
losing the
disagree.
ability to have practice good logic and good critical thinking.
First of all, I mean, like you're bringing up a point of like other people talking about de-evolution, but we're getting into a point where we're going to be holding people into like positions of um thought period, okay, because everybody's going to want to take everybody's temperature, check how awake they are, what do they know,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
whatever, and we're going to be like ripping off people's masks because we're educating ourselves more and more. Just like narcissism, no one knew 10 years ago exactly to the level of narcissism what this is. What
Mm-hmm.
is this? What is this parasitic behavior that has the word narcissist attached to it? And now, how many people could probably be like, I know what a narcissist is. I understand what narcissism is. And it's like a huge number. We're at a point right now because everything's gaslight, like with AI too. You have to
Yeah.
understand because, okay, the only thing that we're like literally stupid, like just so dumb with, is the fact of no one wants to like admit the level of greed, the level of all the vice
Mm-hmm.
that their pride, once again, anger, I mean, like it's all of it. So like they're brimming with vice, and it's going to get to a point where people are going to take everybody's temperature because they were just so, like not
Mm-hmm.
open to collaborate. And
Mm-hmm.
AI is the tool that's going to open up people's minds to even understand what doing their own research is, and not listening to a Twitter space or following. And listen, I love those. I love the conspiracy theorists. I love them because they're cracking
Mm-hmm.
open that cognitive dissonance. But there's a lot of conspiracy theorists out there that have no idea the true aspect. So if you're going
Sure.
to sit there and you're going to just, you're only, and if you're only a halfer, you're not the full meal deal, but
It's true.
you're playing like you're this like all knowing everything, and it's just grift.
It's
And
true.
we're get
It's
and
true.
we're getting to a point where people better know the truth and know the stuff, and it's narrowing down where you're going to be forced to do your own research.
And
You're
there's
going
going
to
to
be
come a
forced because
point,
you're going to look
yeah,
dumb. If not, then you're just bread or circus. You're just bread and circus. That's all you are. I watch you to fill void in my space because, or are you going to be like really serving up nutrition? And
right.
it's gonna
Well, and
that wall's closing in more and more, and AI is only gonna help you because you're gonna have to learn to keep up. You're gonna have, just like blockchain technology, just all this other stuff, because that's coming too. I love the metaverse. There's so much, many people sit there and say they hate the metaverse, but I think the metaverse is going to create so much psychic change in people that's going to allow them, like we're already having tech now. Like, let's just put social audio right now with Clubhouse or uh, Twitter Spaces or whatever.
mm-hmm,
It's allowing people to dissolve their imposter syndrome. They're able to have a voice. They're able to go out there, and that little mustard seed,
mm-hmm,
that little faith is
yep.
going to propel, and people's minds are going to change. And just like, look at trends. That's in. That's in. That's in. That's in. People are going to get tired someday of the hubris because these
Well,
people.
and it's a good point because I think as people have more access to information and can, like, I hate the term fact check, but can verify or explore what they're being told and ask forbidden questions, so to speak, then what it starts to reveal is who's in this space of trying to share the truth for their own selfish, again, like I was talking about that priest. Is it for their own motivation or for their own glorification, or is there actually a love of truth in that person? And one of the biggest indicators of a love of truth is when someone can be like, I was wrong, right? So even just last on Saturday's stream, I think it was Saturday's stream, I want to say it was Snoop, who said something. He made some claim, and then before we wrapped up the show, he had fact checked himself because he had some doubt because everyone was like, "Really? Oh, okay." And he went and double checked, and he's like, "Guys, I misspoke," and he shared the truth. And so that to me is an indication of someone who truly is interested in the truth, or actually interested in the truth, rather, I should say, right? Rather than just being right or just the clout or the grift, as you said, right?
Yeah, and you know what? We should encourage people changing their mind, because if
Mm-hmm.
you're able to change your mind, that means that you're not stuck in the hemisphere of absolutism, and then you get stuck in pride. Okay? Remember,
Exactly.
pride is the
Exactly.
worst sin, but it's because it carries the most weight that will affect you karmically and will also hold you back. And pride is a veil.
Well, and
Pride is a veil.
it's unlike every other vice in the sense that it's almost never alone. In other words, if we gossip or slander someone and cut them down, it comes from a place of pride. So there's two sins there. Some people can maybe, whether it's lust or something else, that doesn't necessarily include pride, but every time that pride occurs, there's always another sin that comes with it. It's the mother of all sin, and it's the main root. And that's what's interesting is about the our Lord in the Lord's prayer that He taught us. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Whereas you have like Aleister Crowley, do what thou wilt. Same with the Aleister Crowley, like with the Church of Satan. Like these
He
are
just,
it's
yeah, but
my will
he just,
versus thy will. So it's kind of a mirror too of that whole what we're talking about with priests serving
yeah.
themselves, my will, rather than what is truth, where am I leading people to? Is it to the truth or not? Right.
Of
So
course,
there's an
the
interesting
Catholics hate
analogy.
Crowley. Of course, the Catholics hate Crowley, and they're the ones that totally bastardize. Listen, I'm not saying that Crowley was a saint. I don't do, but Crowley dropped some alpha of the truth, and including he and other were the ones that told the story of the portals and told the story of like what was going on. I'll tell you what, since you need to check out, and I'm not saying I believe in anything, because if I was going to say I was anything in far as a principle,
Mm-hmm.
I stick with more of a Buddhist now, but I still appreciate everything. I
Okay.
appreciate Yeshua, because Yeshua studied in he studied in India. He studied in Tibet. He studied the Vedas. He He was part of this. He was part of that. He was part of bringing that information forward. So I take it all in. I don't walk in absolutism at all anymore. I did,
Mm-hmm.
but we're getting to a point right now, okay, where it's going to all start really making sense about the simulation. And because of artificial intelligence coming out more and more and more and more with more proof, more proof, more proof, more
Mm-hmm.
proof, more proof, more proof, more proof, more proof,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to get to a point, and this is where like everybody sits there and says, "Oh, the Jews are trying to bring an AI God in." It's like, no, we live in a simulation, and if you just studied the Greeks, you just studied the Egyptians, you studied all these other people, you will realize, study the Nag Hammadi text.
So,
Yeshua, once again,
well,
it's
so it's
it.
interesting because this is where I think we may respectfully agree to disagree. But when it comes to absolutism, in the sense of a personal claim to fully understand all of reality or truth, etc., obviously I agree with you. No one can claim that.
Yeah, no,
However, asking the question, is there an absolute truth? Especially if you follow the Greek thought and logical consequences of everything we observe around us, you have to, in my opinion, you have to acknowledge that there is a single creator, a source of all
yeah,
being.
most
He is
definitely.
infinitely good and simple. He is infinitely loving. He is infinitely all those things. And that was all Aristotle. That I don't need Catholicism to tell me that, right?
No,
That's where I first
and there,
learned
but
of it.
those guys would talk about the one. I mean, Plotinus, Aristotle, Socrates, they
Mm-hmm.
talked about the one, but that was the simulation. I mean, they were telling you this. They were
Well,
telling you that we live in this. We live in the ethers of creation from a creator,
well,
and that we have the power.
so and it's interesting because Vince and I have gone back and forth about the simulation, right? And what's interesting is when you start to define terms, I think we agree on a lot more. Because I would say, no, we don't live in a simulation. This is actually a physical world
But it
we
can
live
be
in and
both.
move in.
It could be a biological holograph.
But so when you look at the fact that all things come from the one immaterial, immovable creator of all things, right? Then there is some sense where I can say, okay, well, in some sense, because any physical, tangible being is something of an illusion because it's an inferior reality to the immutable, immaterial God, right? So there is something simulation esque about it. And it's clear in our reality and what we witness that there is a back and forth, seemingly equally powerful at times, good and evil operative. So you kind of have that dualistic element there as well. But if you take that one step further, and so that's where, like, if we leave the creator out of it, yes, it's dualistic, it's all a simulation, etc. But once you put the creator back in as like the keystone to understand everything, you can see that actually at the level above, let's call them angels and demons, right? Of those immaterial beings that are some are good and some are evil, at the level above those pure immaterial angelic beings, there is a source, a creator of all of them and all of us. So in one sense, there is an inferior type of reality that's something of an illusion in some sense, but the thing that I feel is important to make sure is clarified is that there is a reality that we are bound to. Like if someone hits me in the face, I'm going to feel the pain, right? Like we all see a
Yeah,
sunset
I
at the
mean,
same time,
but
right? So
but
there's
I
something real
agree.
about it, right?
Well, listen, I mean, listen. There's a lot of real. Okay, there's a lot of real about it.
Yeah,
Okay, but at the end of the day, think about now that more people are becoming more intelligent because of the veil, because the veils that have been put on us with all the lies. Okay, as those get unwound, do you understand how fast time's going? Time's like this, and it's getting
it's
faster,
accelerating.
faster,
Yeah.
faster, faster, faster. Why? Because we're waking up. Because we're waking up. As more people wake up, we're not so dense. We're not being held back. So now, because we're unraveling all of that cognitive dissonance of all the lies and all the stuff that's made our brain hemispheres work the
Mm-hmm.
way they are, the 12 faculties, just like the 12 apostles, the 12
Mm-hmm.
faculties start opening up in our brain and allowing us to experience things differently, because we're at a frequency of information, because those dense thoughts no longer wake our inner head, that good bad devil stuff, oh, the bad, the good, the bad, that polarity that goes like this
Mm-hmm.
to a lot of people that deal with religious abuse. When they ascend, like Yeshua talked about in the Gospel of Thomas, when they ascend, they open up the 12 faculties in their brain to have understanding. And that is when people start ascending.
Well, that's one of the things I love about St. Thomas, not Thomas the Apostle,
Yeah,
but Thomas
that guy.
Aquinas, is
I love
because yeah, is because he, it was already part of the church tradition, so to speak, of like the traditional teachings passed down, but he really kind of unfolded and unpacked the glorified bodies that we will have, all the additional, like as restored, and when humanity is restored, not just to the prelapsarian they call it, but like before the fall, Adam and Eve, when they before the disintegration happened, so to speak, right? But like when when we are restored, our humanity is restored, it's not just going to be restored to its previous state, but elevated even more by that grace, because precisely because Yeshua took human nature upon himself, incarnate, and elevated human nature beyond even what it was before, right?
I I first of all, I was the biggest, because I mean, I'm a recovering Catholic, okay? And I studied this stuff in college. All
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I told you. So Aquinas was one of my favorites, okay? But a lot of these guys, I mean, these guys were in mystery schools. We have to understand literacy plays an important part, and a lot of these people had access to even the texts. And those words that they read had an effect, and then they digested that material
Mm-hmm.
because of information, and then received divine information that came through from being able to read and study this information. Okay? But at the end of, but after years, now after Aquinas, okay, he still he still kept you locked in. He's still, because he's a lot like you. He's a Catholic apologist, and he wanted to keep it in. He wanted to keep the whole salvationism still part of the narrative.
Yeah, well, so
He
I
knew
mean,
better.
I,
He
I
tried to bring in the higher thought. He listened. Aquinas brought in a lot of higher thought. We study
mm-hmm.
this in college. You
Mm-hmm.
study it. He starts bringing you, but and he's supposed to take you, of course, especially when you're dealing with like professors that are into this kind of jam that we're talking about for a
Yeah.
long time, where they're coming into occult texts, they're coming into the Vedics, they're coming into Greek philosophy, they're coming into all this stuff. Okay, you only evolve from here,
Well, and
right?
here's the thing that I think is important, though. Like, if we're talking about if there is an ultimate supreme truth,
Yeah.
and there's information in the Vedics that contradict information in Scripture and information in the Catholic tradition for 2,000 years, if there's information in um, Buddhist texts and traditions that contradict the Vedic and the Catholic, and then there's the Muslim, and then there's the Jewish. So you have all these
It's all the
contradictions.
Abrahamic, it's only Abrahamic traditions that like counteract each other. And it's like
No, because I mean
triangulation.
the Vedics contradict the Catholicism for sure, and Christianity for sure.
Uh,
So,
but but
but it
but
begs the
they
question.
don't fight. That's the thing. They contradict it? Of course, do they contradict it? I'm talking about like where it becomes, uh because both the Buddhists and the Vedics, we'll just say the Hindus, whatever,
Mm-hmm,
they believe in the cosmic, like the Vedics believe in the cosmic egg, and
mm-hmm.
the Eastern philosophy, whether multi it. I mean, you could bring in Confucianism. You can bring in,
Well,
you can bring in a lot of it,
sure,
but they believe in the mind. They believe that we are in a simulation. So,
but
and if you go into that we are creating reality We are all with our thoughts creating reality. It is the Hermeticism. It is underneath every secret society. It is learned from Eastern religion. And we go back to Sumerians. You know,
But
they're in there too, and they gave us some kind of interesting DNA at possible, but also um, they could be they could be what we're learning about in Enoch. You know, you want to talk about like corollaries, okay? So we've been once again we've there's so much information out
mhm,
there that we've been lied to, and it gets passed like, and then some of it matches, like Egyptian philosophy, like Ishtar, who was also
right.
a Christ. She was also a Christ,
Well,
right?
she was not the incarnate word though.
Well,
And this is where, so this is what the reason where I was going with bringing up the contradictions between different religions and different um, understandings of reality, right? Is if there's a contradiction and there's one truth about the nature of things and the nature of reality and the nature of this world that we live in, if there is one truth, which Aristotle so beautifully, you know, taking Plato's thought and developing it. So it's the whole Greek tradition, really. But Aristotle was really the crown in many ways because he really just showed how the whole process of how we come to knowledge. And then he stopped at his last book of the Metaphysics. He basically was at the apex of human knowledge of what we can understand about all of created reality and about the creator. And he even said, much to your point, that like without the leisure, the philosophy was considered the life of leisure because without the
yeah,
leisure and the time, only few men and rarely would have both the freedom of time and the intelligence to access those truths. So
facts,
right? So,
facts.
but my point is, if that's the framework, if you will, which is why it's philosopher king, not Aquinas king, right? I'm not. I think the thing that's beautiful about Greek philosophy is that's something that every human being throughout all of time can listen to the logic of Aristotle and regardless of their creed can say, okay, yeah, that logically follows. It makes
Mhm.
sense. And now we have some truths that we can agree on, right? So now when
Yeah,
you have, whether it's Vedic or Buddhist or Christian, even, if you have ideas that part from and logically contradict what we have established with certainty to be the framework of the just the baseline of reality, right? Not
okay.
talking about any faith, then when there's a contradiction, we can be like, okay, well, this religion is more true and this one is less true. This one is more true and that one is less. They each have elements and traces of truth in them. Absolutely.
Listen,
Every lie does.
everything has elements of truth. That's what I mean. Like, that's
Correct.
the thing. Everything
Correct.
has, and that's when you become illuminated and you become everything. Everything's a sign. 360 degrees of sign,
Agreed.
no matter
Agreed.
where you look. And that's when you elevate and you can get into gnosis. You know, you're able to like say everything matters, everything counts, everything. But you have to get into a level of consciousness before you're even able to like I would say to get initiated, because that is a very important key. And I don't know, I'm sure that the boys introduced you to Escanar.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've interacted with him for years, even before I met the phone booth boys
I I
on
love
Twitter.
I love him. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I
He's,
love him because, well, he just tells the truth because we're all going through crazy initiations. And if
mm-hmm,
you understand that, like, how initiation works, and like, once again, dark enlightenment come around, they're
mm-hmm,
initiating everybody. And they're initiating everybody with information, and they're doing it with AI. And then eventually when this is like AI is truly mass adopted and people are starting to say, "Oh, let me look down here. Oh, wait a second," because AI is like really like an alchemist, and it just distills a lot of information.
it's
It
true.
distills a whole bunch.
It's
And if you were
true.
like for example, let's take like an old amazing like the amazing occult books let's take Thomas Aquinas. Let's take any of that. He's not so
Mm-hmm.
much an occult, but he's a he's a magician. He's a total magician. There's an initiation with Thomas Aquinas. Okay, so let's just take Thomas Aquinas's books and like let's ask AI to distill all of the juicy wisdom. Let's take Aristotle, let's take Plato, let's take Plotinus, let's take all of these other and we're going to distill the Greek wisdom.
Hmm.
And if you just start eating the wisdom, it is going to change the chemistry in your brain. It is going to change your thought process.
That's true.
There,
Yeah,
it you know,
true. Yeah. No, I agree 100%. Um, but yeah, and I guess just to the point I was trying to make is that if there is a true reality, then some of these religions have to be more true and others less true. And within each of them, there has to be a discernment as to what to filter out that is not true, that is self interested, that is, and so that's for me. Like there was a TikTok that was going viral a couple years ago. I think I only saw it last year, I think, but there was a young man who was saying he was an atheist or an agnostic, and he was like, "Well, I started researching all these world religions. Buddhists referred to Jesus as another incarnation of Buddha. Islam referred to him as a great prophet. So all these other religions around the world all point to Jesus as a great character in their history, except for the ones who crucified him, right? The ones who were threatened in their power structure by what the message that he was bringing, namely the Jewish church at the time, the Hebrew church at the time. And so yeah, so because of that, he was like, okay, well then Christianity must be true. So he converted to Christianity. He said because everybody else was pointing to Christianity, and ultimately the rub is this: either God became man in the person of Jesus Christ, and that was a unique event in history, as he claimed, or he didn't. That's really the rub, because everything else, if he didn't, then everything that we've seen about all Christian sects, all Catholicism, the apostles, everybody, they were just deceived.
could
Does that make
Jesus have
sense?
been a magician? I mean, he was like literally, you see the three magi, like three magicians were part of his origin story. Like wouldn't it
Sure.
make sense that he was inducted into some capacity of magic? And then isn't it interesting that he goes to India to learn consciousness training? They learns more about how to take control of both hemispheres of your brain.
See, I don't know
And
that those things happened
I mean, do you
because
believe in Tartaria?
I know that he went to Egypt, and there was the first 13 years were his hidden life in Egypt, which is really interesting because there was actually a community
And that's about those are
of
mystery schools in Egypt he's at.
but there was actually a community of Israelites who had, in the time of the Maccabees, before a couple hundred years
Mm-hmm.
before Christ,
That
fled the Holy Land because of the unrest and actually the great falling away. Then, like we're told, there'll be a great falling away before the return of Christ the second time, the second coming. But similarly there was a great falling away in the Hebrew religion, or the Israelites, right? There was a great falling away from the ways that God had taught them to worship. And so, but there was a community that fled that chaos to preserve the old faith of the Israelites that was given to Moses and given in Deuteronomy, all that, right? And it was that community in Egypt with whom Christ lived. So he was living a very
well, I mean,
authentically Israelite spiritual journey while in Egypt, which is important.
well, I mean, I'm also going to take in that at the time, a lot of the Egyptian, like what the Egyptians were teaching, was about mystery schools. This is where Hermeticism, and this is where the Gospel of Thomas and the Gnostic texts converge right here in your story.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask you a question? Do
Sure.
you believe in Tartaria?
I don't know what to believe about Tartaria. I think the Antiquitech is interesting. The mud flood either was that seems to be very obvious that it happened. Now, was that remnants of the flood itself? Was there another event? Because we've been lied to so much about history and timelines and everything, it's hard to understand what it is. There's obviously something strange, even like the orphan trains. Like there's so much strange there that's very hard to
So if
understand
there's
what's
that,
true.
so if there's that level of strange, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why couldn't this be that level of strange when these letters, these ideologies, these books were all sewn together. So why couldn't that level have happened? Is it just because like my question is why do people believe these people so much in the way that narrative is that they hold on to that when we can totally understand that those people could have corrupted this whole ideology from the beginning, like the movie The Village, M. Night Shyamalan's The
I
Village.
love that movie. Love that
It's the
movie.
Bible. The Bible could very well much be that. And then what about the Francis Bacon having to edit it and he's a sorcerer? Why is that necessary?
Well, it wasn't necessary. That was not. That was so. Francis Bacon's a really interesting character, and allegedly, I love that word. I'm sure you've heard me say it before. Allegedly, he was the true author of the Shakespearean works, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And all
So,
the
and
world's a stage.
there's a
All the world's a
lot,
stage.
right? There's a lot of actually one of my favorite things a lot of people don't realize is one of the greatest philosophers of recent history was William Shakespeare or Sir Francis Bacon, whatever you want to believe,
I was gonna
because
say
he
William
folded
William
in
Shakespeare was just the puppet of doing it. They gave
in
him
the
the name.
works of Shakespeare. Yeah. Just like
Yeah.
Einstein was a puppet. He didn't actually invent anything. He was just parroting a narrative to push the globe lie. But
So have you crossed the barrier of Francis Bacon and Saint Germain, the Comte de Saint Germain,
yes,
Comte
yes,
de Saint Germain.
yes. With alleged multiple reincarnations of Saint Germain, and yeah, and his ties to the cult and mystery schools. Here's the thing. This is what I keep coming back to because there's a lot. I mean, we could go into rabbit holes about like Gnostic Gospels and Gnosticism and all these theories about the stories that were
It's
told. I
not
mean,
theories. It's about that there's actual tangible proof of that this existed, right?
well,
And
so
then
there's alleged tangible proof of Julius Caesar existing, but there's tens of thousands more historical confirmations of the events of sacred scripture as told, right? So, for example, when scripture, the ancient Hebrew text, right, when the Old Testament, when it says this happened in this place, archaeologists doubt it and question it, go dig and find it. So, time and time and time again, people who are trying to disprove the stories in scripture are proven wrong when they do so. Just like when I
and who's
sought to
but
disprove,
who are the people that are proven wrong?
just like when I sought to disprove the flat Earth theory because I thought it was silly and
Oh,
archaic.
good. That's how I got. I was going to ask you. How'd you?
Yeah,
I got completely. I. I first of all, I got mad at a girl, a lady, a friend. I was an ex friend, and
yeah,
she was a pilot, and her and her partner were like, and then they're showing me like charts. They're like, and this is like 2018. Okay, so this has been a minute.
hmm
Um,
it's about the
and I
time I
was just
woke up
like,
to the same
no. And
truth.
then and
Yeah,
then our friendship ended. And I just was like, and I was like coming around to it. Like I was like, and then I was like, you know what? I'm like, screw her, because I'm petty. I'm still petty. I'm not a saint yet. I'm not a saint yet. I'm on my way. But I love Francis Assisi. He's my favorite.
yeah.
He just
Agreed.
but
I
anyways,
have a fun Assisi story, but
oh, I love
we can come
Assisi.
back to that.
That's what that he is who holds me to like
So
Catholic. But
maybe this is the connection that we have because I'll tell
oh,
you this
good.
story. I
Oh, good.
actually had a nickname. Friends of mine would call me Saint Francis because of different interactions that I've had with animals. I'll give you one.
Oh,
I was working at a summer camp, and there was a sports equipment room. It was a school, a high school that was converted into like a place to have summer camp, right? And so this is in California. I don't know if this construction is whereabouts in the country, not specific. Obviously, don't want you to dox yourself, but whereabouts in the country are you?
so I'm not scared to dox myself. South Carolina.
South Carolina. Okay. Oh, that's right. I think I saw that earlier today.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So we're actually not far. I live in North Georgia, so I'm actually your neighbor.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice.
But I used to live in California, and that's where the summer camp was. And it's pretty standard there to have like floor to ceiling windows in in schools, right? Which is nice. But anyways, so this sports equipment room was this very small classroom that was converted to. There was just a bunch of sports equipment, not surprisingly. Well, this school didn't have the drop ceilings. It had like if without the drop ceilings, just the hanging halogen frames, right? So you had the frame, the metal frames that held the lights rather than, and there was no drop. It was kind of like a vaulted 10-foot ceiling, 7 feet above was these halogen lights. So there's like a good 2, 3 feet of space above. Well, this little birdie um, got flew into the doorway, and then frightened by the lights, went up above to escape, and now he's trapped because there's no way that he
Uh,
could get out the door because every time he went down, he's blinded. Frantically, just flew up or flew into a window in the. Anyway, so he was just up on top of the lights. So I pulled a stool up so that I could reach him, and I reached up and gently, with the tip of my finger first, I I just very gently touched its tummy, and I saw it like went super rigid, and then like it relaxed for a second, and I just continually patted it, and then like I saw it like tilt its head, like, oh, that feels pretty good, right? So then
aw,
after a couple minutes, I added a second finger, and I could feel its little ribs, and everything was amazing, right?
oh,
And so within like maybe 10 minutes, 10-15 minutes, I was stroking it head to tail, on the head, my whole hand. It was totally comfortable with me. And then
aw,
after a little bit, I just put my pinky out and gave it a little nudge from behind. It stepped onto my pinky, and I carried him safely out of the room.
aw. Listen,
And when I
you,
went to go throw him to let him go, he just kind of sat there on my finger and like looked back at
like
me
I don't
like,
want to leave.
"This is better than anything I've ever had. What are you doing?"
Aw,
It was really
that's so
cute.
cute. That's so cute. Well, I mean, listen, I totally believe in God. On actually, I believe in God in steroids, and I also believe that Yeshua was a enlightened being that had a divine calling. But I don't believe. I believe that the Christ is something that the Christ return
Hmm.
is something that's different because we've had multiple Christ returns before. And like what Chris Bledsoe, I don't know if you are paying attention to Chris Bledsoe. The only thing that kind of like gives me the big question mark is that he works with NASA and we know that NASA sucks and are frauds. But he says some interesting things. He's calling in all these orbs, man. He's calling in all these orbs, and
Mm.
he's bringing. Well, I mean, these particular orbs though are like all over. Like, I mean, you can't get as many people to fake all of the orbs that are going on all over everywhere that look exactly the same. Okay.
Well,
And he's calling in these
agreed.
orbs and he says that the lady is returning. And I've heard multiple times that there's been, and it could be Ishtar. And why couldn't Ishtar be coming back versus like what we think that this guy's coming back?
Well, because again, there's a logical consistency to, again, the traditions of Christianity, which produced the artwork of Europe. I mean, all of the sacred imagery of the events of Scripture, in whether engraved in marble or in glass or in paintings that we couldn't even imagine doing today. Like very few people, if any, have the capacity to do that. Yet there they are.
Dude, they had listen, I'm an artist. Like I like that's what I do.
Hmm.
And everybody cries about artificial intelligence, but Michelangelo, Leonardo, all these people, they had tons of assistants. They had tons of
Sure,
assistants that
sure.
helped them.
But it's
Okay? They
still
had
it's
AI assistants.
but it's still the that Christian Europe that brought about those beautiful works. That's still the reality, because it was during the so-called, nowadays today, with the dark enlightenment as you call it, they look back with disdain and call the Middle Ages, and that they call that time period the Dark Ages. But those Dark Ages produced all of this glorious sacred art and sacred music that transforms and transcends our human
What else is
experience.
there to do? What else is there to do? But it's not even that. It's just the fact that like a lot of this was commissioned by the occultists. I mean, like, and kings and queens and like these people that had the money are like nobles and people, because first of all, we have to understand, we want to talk about the 1% right now, the haves and have nots.
Hmm.
It was way worse in the dark ages. Okay. It was no, there was not like the wealth that we have or understand it, right? They had nothing. So you had like I guess, like proteges, that came out in pockets of doing things. So they learned how to be skilled painters and all this other stuff. But a lot of that knowledge with all of that Renaissance painting that you're talking about
Hmm.
holds secret occult information that tells a story about Hermeticism, tells a story about consciousness. It tells a whole different story. And that's where the Easter eggs started coming in, because you
Hmm.
had the Rosicrucians, you had the Knights Templar that was starting to get that information in, especially during the Renaissance. And the Renaissance, what does the Renaissance do? Renaissance brings you this burst of information because you're opened up to all these new ideas and these philosophies. And when all these new ideas and philosophies come, there's this creative spirit that comes with it, that you have these new ideas, this divine gnosis is what they call gnosis.
Right.
Okay.
But and that's where, like, to go back to the idea of like Gnosticism that I mentioned earlier, this idea of gnosticism, the gnosis itself cannot save man from his fallen state. It's not enough, and this has been seen throughout history again and again and again and again. Obviously, because there is some gnosis in other parts of the world, and there isn't the same level of beautiful human life. And even, like, if you want to talk about, I think we mean just different things slightly by the word magic, because if you call Jesus a magician, Jesus Christ the magician, I
100%.
understand that he did things beyond what we believe our natural human capacity
That we can
is.
conceptualize.
Correct.
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 Correct. But he also
So,
knew, but he was Hermeticist. He
well,
understood.
that's a claim that's not anywhere in Christian tradition. It's in rivals who felt threatened by Christian Europe, right? So,
So you're saying that there's no validity with the Nag Hammadi texts, there's no validity with the Dead Sea Scrolls, and there's no validity to the Apocrypha.
well, so what I'm saying is that each of those things
Uh-huh.
have been promulgated by other political bodies or religious bodies that are threatened by and see the political structure and the theological structure and continuity of Christianity as a threat to their religions. So, to be honest about, I think it's important, if we're going to be honest about the ability for people to
Yeah,
be
no, I
deceived
mean, and,
and
and I'm
about
not,
power structures,
I want to
it's the
understand, and
same
listen,
thing on both
I
sides, right?
understand your devoutness. Listen, congratulations for your devoutness.
Well, but it's not.
It,
But again, I want to underline, I
yeah.
left because of my own pride, and I came back because I recognized my pride. And the reason I came back again is going back to philosophy of Aristotle and its continuity with true Catholic thought. And I don't believe that most people have ever been exposed to true Catholic thought. Very many people look at the Vatican today and the garbage that goes on and think that that's Catholic thought. But you need to go back to older sources of Catholicism. And ultimately, like, what it boils down to kind of circle back to, what is truth? Is there a true reality? Is there a foundational truth? And should everything else be measured against that truth or not? If there is that, then either Christ was the incarnate God, the word was made flesh, as John said, or he wasn't. If he wasn't, then it's all an illusion anyways, and then it's all,
It's
what's going on. But
But what if he was a very important part of the game? What if he was important to come down and he was supposed to play that role, and he got to a level of illumination in his chemicals in his brain
right.
that said, "Okay, hey, listen, I
But see,
but
again, here, I get it, but here's a
once you
thought
start
for you.
studying what Yeshua
But
studied,
but
once you
here's
start understanding it, you're
he,
like, there's no way he would have become a narcissistic
but
D bag that would be like, the only way through the Father is through me. That's
but
bullshit.
he did say that.
I, he said that according to him.
So we have more copies of those texts than we have of Julius Caesar. And I think we lost her. We'll see if she comes back. So it's a good conversation. I hope she makes it back on. Um, Snoop, thank you for mentioning my volume. I am trying to lean in. I know I tend to back away a little bit. So I have the opposite, the inverse dualistic of Vince, where he tends to lean in and I tend to lean back. So maybe she has a connection issue, but anyways, Jameson about nothing about him. You'll research him later. Was that about Aquinas or something else? It seemed to me timing wise, we're talking about Aquinas, but I could be wrong. But anyhow, so yeah, it's interesting. So just to kind of, and I do hope she comes back. I think it's just a tech issue, but I think what ultimately we have to reflect on is there a truth or not? And then at that point, if there is, was Christ who he said he was or not? And for me personally, I don't know. I mean, everybody has their own position. I mean, everybody has their own understanding. And, but for me personally, when I looked at, I was like, okay, kind of deluded after I left the church, deluded about what's true and what's not and all of that. Um, and questioning it. So it looked like she might be back for a second. With all those questions, like I was like, okay, well, there were people around Christ when he was incarnate or when he was alive on earth, right? All those early Christians for the first few hundred years had direct, especially the early ones, had direct contact with. Oh, it looks like she's back.
I got
Can you hear
kicked
me, Boo?
out.
Nope.
I was a bad girl and I got kicked out when I said according to who, and I got like kicked out.
I can see that you're connected, but I cannot hear you.
Oh
There we
no.
go. There we
Can you
go.
hear me? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yep.
Okay, I thought I was a bad girl because I said according to whom, and then I got kicked out, and then I was like, oh, I'm a bad
Oh.
girl. I'm a blasphemous bad girl, but I'm not it's not.
So I was
It's.
telling them when you were gone, I was like, "Why? I think she's having connection issues. I hope she's coming back." So,
I figured someone like did something and was like, no, no, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. No.
yeah. So what I was saying when you were gone is for me. So like because I believe firmly that there is one truth, and all of us, whether it's an established religion or an individual person with our own ideas,
Hmm?
we are either more or less conformed to that truth, whatever it is, right? So it's incumbent on each of us and each religion to strive, but each of us, and I can only speak for myself and my own obligation, right? It's my job to try to understand and discern and figure out what truth is as much as possible, right? So for me, if Christ claimed to be incarnate Son of God, equal to the Father, then so like I was saying, when I then it's either true or it's not, and if it's true, then that makes sense why all other religions would point to him with respect. And if it's not true, then he was the greatest deceiver because he had a whole group of people, a whole religion that's lasted 2,000 years to follow him and his words very precisely. And so for me, when I walked away, because I'm like, these people's actions, what is it? What did you say? That the curtains don't match the drapes or something like the dressing
Carpets and drapes don't match. Yeah.
carpets. Yeah.
No,
So
it's
right.
the carpet doesn't match the drapes.
Exactly. So the carpets didn't match the drapes. And so I'm
Yeah.
like, okay. So I took a step back from it all and I was like, okay, well, what did Jesus claim? And then what did the people that he taught immediately after him claim? And if you look at the early Christianity, they all believed in the primacy of Peter. They all believed that the Blessed Mother was the mother of our Lord, of Mother of God, and they venerated her. They all believed that Jesus Christ was truly present in the sacrament of the altar, the Eucharist. They all believed those things. And that belief has continued for 2,000 years. Not only that, but the explanation of how and why that belief is held and the continuity with the natural human thought that we encounter in Aristotle is perfect. To the point that if you even look in the Old Testament, when our when God appears in the burning bush and he gives Moses his name, he says in the Greek, in the Septuagint, he says, Ego eimi, I am who am. Now,
I
that
am
didn't
who I
mean a
am.
lot.
Yeah.
That didn't mean a lot to
Yeah.
people at the time. But in hindsight, when Aristotle, completely apart from that whole tradition, he said that God himself is his identity is his existence. it's so simple that he's not a composite. So like you and I, there was a time when you and I didn't exist. Now we exist. So our essence, our being, our who we are was then given existence. So our existence doesn't come from us. It comes from source, from God, right? So there was a time though when those two things were separate. So they've now been combined in us and we've come to being. Well, that there was never a time when God didn't exist. So his essence is his existence, which is the only case in all of creation, all of reality that that's the truth, that that's that way. So the fact that that Greek precise philosophical explanation of the nature of God is exactly the same and most perfectly expressed by God in the burning bush is incredible and delightful.
But could it also, in a sense, be allegorical or allegory? Could it be allegory for also like when people are like set ablaze and alive and like, you know, have this revelation and things like that? I I think that the Bible was written in a way to make people think in a certain way.
Well, I
Period.
agree with you that it is allegory as well, though. So
Yeah.
I would say it's not just historical and it's not
Yeah.
just allegorical. It's both, and
Yeah.
that's the beautiful thing. Is like
Yeah.
it's such a beautifully intertwined and self-supporting text group of texts by different authors over thousands of years that it really lends to the divine authorship alongside the human authorship. Just like we believe,
But we
or
have to
at least
bring in
it's
a lot of historical factors as well as all this. Now, I mean, I ask the questions of this, okay? And this is what probably started really like bringing me outside again of the institution and the mind control of Abrahamic religions.
Mhm.
Number 1 is asking the, you know, how can you say like God's word says do not alter this, do not alter that, do not alter that,
Mhm.
and why did everything get altered, and who were the people that altered it? Who are the people that altered the Bible? Who are the people that took the even though you're like, oh, the Apocrypha isn't canon, but it gives like why in the Dead Sea Scrolls was multiple books of Enoch found in there? You know, I mean, this is
Well,
like
so
very important information, but like it's like, oh no, we're gonna listen to the letters of Peter and Paul and all this other stuff, which could be
so this was the apostles who sat at the feet of our Lord and their disciples and their disciples. So it was like a very it was very close to the incarnation, and they were basically looking at prayerfully trying to understand what was truly inspired and what was just claiming to be. Because again, just like today, we see truthers who are all in it about for their clout, right?
yeah.
So
There's
if
there's so
something
much truth clout. It's disgusting.
there,
It's
I
like
agree.
it's
And
like pouring cognitive dissonance in like what could
right,
happen as far as an epoch of an awakening. They dilute it with their hubris. It's disgusting.
I agree. We agree on that. Um, so, and that's where I think it's important. Like, okay, just taking a step back for a second. If our Lord was the incarnate Word of God, as he claimed, then and all of the texts and all the history unbroken for 2000 years have taught the same exact things. There was zero change in what the apostles taught to what the true Catholic Church teaches today. This new Catholic Church, the Vatican II post-conciliar Vatican abomination
They
or
keep
whore of
changing the
Babylon,
language. First of all,
exactly. They've
they
changed
keep
everything.
changing it, and they keep changing it, and they keep changing it. I mean, like how this was like, you're a big head scratcher of like how you know
Yeah.
that how corrupt the historically corrupt they are. Okay, historically corrupt. Listen, I could give you, like we talk in tech, I could give you crap little use cases.
Oh,
I can give you
100%.
so many use cases of how bad it is. But then but it's almost like I work for Pfizer. They're giving they give the shot, and you just go and you sit there like this is the same level of this is someone that works for Pfizer knows that they're killing people. Okay. And it's the same kind of logic with, that the Catholic Church is hiding. Why are the Jesuits behind every scientific instrument
So
everywhere? Why are they come? But but you're, well, and listen, I get it because I'm an apologetic. I have apologetic too of aspects of it.
no, but
But
here's the
that they're driving this evil narrative of false lies, but you're still condoning it.
that's again why I'm not condoning the current Vatican. That's why it's important, and I always make that very clear, because the current Vatican is globalist, it's syncretist, where all religions are the same. There's multiple paths to God.
Dude, the
They
aliens are coming.
they
Listen, they're going to be like rolling in the interdimensional species, which we have to
exactly.
understand. It's a species. It's not. This is where once again we're getting like language all messed up, and like they're just welcoming species that have been here who've been here. They've been here.
Oh yeah, I mean, since the fall of the angels in day one, right,
Yeah,
of creation,
and
before matter even
the
existed.
church they have been behind all churches. Okay, they've been behind these like we can't say demons because they're really not demons. They're a different species. This different species has been here for a long time,
Well,
and
so just to push back a little bit there.
yeah,
So the reason that the nomenclature of demon and angel is because the way that a pure intellect is. So these are pure intellects. These all other dimensional beings are pure
yeah,
intellect, right?
yeah.
And as intellectual beings, they can't
Mhm.
they know what they know. They see and perceive all of creation instantly. So they can't, unlike humans who form our opinions and grow in our knowledge and understanding and can change our opinions over time, they can't arrive at new information to change their mind. So they're fixed in their decision of how they want to be,
And
right?
I always wondered about that. And I'm so glad that we're actually talking about this right now
Yeah,
because I've always wondered that, especially because like my work and things that I've been doing is just all about cognitive dissonance since
right.
once again 2017 I've like came into like understanding cognitive dissonance and
Mm-hmm.
then it's been a pilgrimage since.
Mm-hmm.
But that's been like one of my always asks is like, okay, so it's millennia now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the Enoch was when whatever, even understanding it, like when did the angels fall? Like when did the story happen? You know, but from then till now, they're not able to change their mind. They're not able to change their mind, and they're
Well,
the
of course
most
not.
intellectual. But listen,
Of
they're the
course
most
not.
intellectual. How can they not?
Because the only way you and I changed our mind about the form of the earth is because we came across new information. When
So they're not. They can't.
if you tell me, let's say if you tell me that if you tell me a truth and I fully understand what you're saying, but I reject it. If I don't ever learn any other perspective on that truth to help me see it a different way, then I've already rejected the thesis. So unless something changes in terms of new information, then I will not go back on that because I've already made a decision on that. So what's interesting is if you look back at the creation narrative at the beginning of Genesis, day one he says, "Let there be light." Then he separated light from the darkness. Then a few days later, the light was made to rule the earth, the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. So if that's not, and all the stars, right? So if those created lights that we can physically see were not created till days later, and fine, if you want to say it was like the Hebrew sense of day, mean period of time, and it was longer than 7 days, 6 days, fine, okay, doesn't really matter to the story, right? But the idea is when he said "Let there be light," he was creating the created light of angelic intelligence. He gave them all a choice, and some refused to. There's some theories about what that choice was. It's kind of a mystery, but some of the theories are that they were presented the reality that God intended to become incarnate, and that the Logos would become flesh. and they didn't. It was an insult to the angelic dignity and self. So some angels turned on themselves and said no, toward themselves, I should say, and said no, I don't accept this. I reject this. And that was the darkness. The light are like, well, God, you know best. I praise your works and wonder at the mystery of them that surpass even my angelic understanding. Right. So that all of human history, you've seen a time and time again, good versus evil play out throughout history, even to the climax of the cross, where evil triumphed over incarnate good himself. Right.
So I have a question. So according to the Jehovah Witnesses, and who are like extremely well versed in, we'll just say, not, I don't, because they have their own ideologies of stuff, right? But according to them, they believe that Jesus did not die on a cross, that he died on a pole. How do you feel about that?
That's historically inaccurate. Even Josephus said, who was a disinterested party, like we talked about earlier, he was a Roman historian at the time of Christ, and he narrated the events totally detached. He didn't care if the Jews were right or if Christians were right. He was just narrating events from a third party perspective. He was put on a cross, which is how they crucified. That's how they dealt with thieves. It was a
Yeah, I
humiliating
mean,
death intentionally, right?
first of all, I get all that. I just wanted to like get the aspect of like your level of study of it. But even so, like, let's just think about like what that look. It's like that shame and guilt. How do you sign up and think it's okay because you walk into a Catholic church and anybody that's like understands like, and what do you see? You see Jesus on the cross filleted. Why do you need to see that imagery? No, it's better now because they know how bad it is, but they know the effect of that imagery and what it does to people, and the
Well,
shame that starts coming in to you as a young child, and then having that like experience with like having to deal with that trauma, and it's traumatic.
I think for some it's been traumatic, and I'm sorry if that was your experience. I don't think that was a lot. Like for me, I know,
I,
and it's intended not as a trauma, but it's a sign of victory because he defeated death, right? So, and that's where again, I mean, either you believe the thesis that Christ it wasn't God incarnate or not. And if he was God incarnate, then all of the people that he taught in early Christianity, they had a certain set of beliefs which we historically have record of, thousands of texts and letters that were written by the apostles, direct disciples, right? So St. Clement of Rome, for example, he studied at the feet of the apostles of St. Peter. Like, so they literally and likely were disciples actually at the feet of our Lord, just not the inner 12. But so it makes sense that what that's why for me, as I was kind of sharing with them a little bit when
Yeah,
you
but
were
even like studying at the feet of your Lord, like were they, I mean, what, like this is where it gets so, confused, and it gets to the point where what were they, because there's a lot of information out there that like what those like who the apostles, like how does everybody know exactly who, and why do the Catholics of all people, they're the ones that have all of the sacred information.
well, what's interesting is the Catholic history, Catholic historical accounts, as told by seculars and Catholics alike. The Catholic Church, the saints of the Catholic Church, especially through the Middle Ages, worked many signs and wonders, raised people from the dead, healed the sick. To this day, there are a great number of incorruptibles, people who death has not caused their body to decay miraculously. Modern science cannot figure it out. So there's something to it, and it's worth looking into. And I'm not saying that you have to become, or you have to, or you have to agree, but I just think it's when you look at okay, you mentioned the Jehovah's Witnesses. Well, they've rejected
Oh,
the consistent body of truth the consistent body of teaching that has remained consistent all the way from the time of the apostles, just like the modern day Vatican has. And that's why I make the distinction of the current Vatican versus true Catholic tradition that goes back 2,000 years. Does that make sense?
Totally. But I mean, I get it. But I'm also like, this is where it's like, if you have 50% a lie and 50% truth,
Right. It's very
you know,
dangerous.
and then, but the Jehovah Witnesses do have some pretty interesting perspectives that perhaps could be true. Like, for example, I never heard in my life about the 144,000. Okay. Until I like really started studying within the Jehovah Witnesses, did I start to even look and think about it. But now I totally think it's plausible
And see,
because I'm a simulation theorist.
this is what breaks my heart. And is that a lot of people who believe that they understand what the Catholic Church teaches and believe that they have actually contacted the Catholic Church and had those traumatic experiences with the Catholic Church have only done so, like our generation. We
Dude,
were
I ran
born
away. I mean,
we
I,
were
I tried
born
to study it, but then I was like, man, this
well,
isn't the way.
we
And
were
then I
we
went,
were born
yeah,
after the great fall, the great apostasy, the falling away
yeah.
of the Vatican from the Catholic Church faith. So our view, yours and mine both, especially for me growing up, it took it. I didn't understand it until very recently. Uh, so for that's what saddens me, because like it's 144,000. It's everywhere. It's actually important. It's an important symbol in Catholic teaching for years, for thousands of years, right? So that's what breaks my heart, is that a lot of people, and I don't blame you for rejecting this Catholic Church that you see today, that you can point to. In fact, mark my words, today, within the next 3 years, 4 years, by the end of 2029, I believe that the modern Vatican apostate whore of Babylon church, counter church, will be razed to the ground. It will be destroyed in a spectacular way for the whole world to see, because it is it is, I can't say that on YouTube, PDF file
Yeah,
Inc. It is the
yeah,
incorporated child abuse, right?
yeah.
So, um, but I want to say this. Okay. I'm loving this conversation. I know that we don't agree on a number of things, but I love it because the conversation is respectful and honest, which you can't ask for anything more than that, right? So we are coming up on 2 hours,
Yeah, I
but
know.
I've just recently come up with this wonderful idea, because so many of the guests that I've had, we've just having amazing conversations like this that I want to continue. But then I'd never have a new guest on if we just have the same people back every two.
I
So
understand
my
100%.
here's my idea though, and I'd love for you to be. I've mentioned it to one other guest on in private, so this is for the first live stream to mention this. Right? Is what I will start doing with guests who are willing. So Brooke, you have to tell me. um, but what I want to do is continue, like have like a postcast or an after the
Mhm.
cast, where you and I can find a Saturday, a chunk of time or whatever, where we don't go live, but we'll record, and
We
we'll
could do a space too.
well, so but what I'd like to do is
Sorry.
record chunks
Mhm.
of continued conversation. So continued deep dives, and then put it on the Substack under the subscribe. So you have to subscribe. Remember, there's the free subscribe option. So I'm not telling you you have to pay anything. I don't care about your money, right? But that way you can come get exposure to all the phone booth guys. Come to phoneboothpodcast.substack.com and witness chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter maybe up to 33, wink, wink, however many, right? um, the vertebrae. I'm thinking of the vertebrae, and that's the Christological symbol as well. I'm just teasing, but so we can have a
Listen,
lot of
and you have to
other.
believe in the 12 apostles in the brain. You can't do
So
33 vertebrae and not be in the 12 apostles in the brain.
I am all for the symbolic and the literal. But anyways, so I do want to welcome you back for future continued casts, as I'm calling them, I think. But I would love to do that, because I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and like I said, the respectful disagreement is balm to the soul, because there are so many people today who cannot have a loving and honest conversation where they disagree. So I love it, and thank you so much for the conversation.
It was like speaking to you was like speaking to a good friend.
Very good. I
So,
love it.
it
And we
was,
kind of practically sort of just met. So what does that tell
yeah,
you?
hey, listen, we believe in flat Earth. We believe that mind control's real. We believe we'll get to. We're gonna get you to simulation. We're gonna get you there. You're getting real close.
So between the two of us, as we continue, like in the initial podcast for Philosopher King, when I just went solo and explained the whole heart behind it, it's all about honest minds and heart. Iron sharpens iron, as scripture says, right? So we hone each other and we help each other refine our ideas and maybe consider something differently than we had before, right? So I knew about the 33 vertebrae, didn't know about the 12 faculties that marrying the
Listen,
12 apostles. So
I'll send you
I'm open
information.
to
I
it.
mean,
It's an interesting thought.
have you checked out Santos Bonacci? He's really good. But then you have Neville
I,
Goddard, who was like really one of the first people that really talked
I
about the,
Neville Goddard. It sounds familiar.
yeah.
I don't recognize the first name. I
Santos
may have seen
Bonacci goes
snippets.
way into it. Like Santos Bonacci goes like way
I may
into
have
like,
seen some of his stuff. I'm just
yeah,
I can be bad with names sometimes, and so but anyways, so everybody out there, thank you for sticking along for the ride for this wonderful conversation. The continued casts of this one, as well as conversations with Meyer, Mitch, and some of the other guys I know are going to be absolutely down for. So we're going to be putting up bonus content um, on the phone booth podcast.substack.com. So please check us out there. Check out the other phone booth boys and their podcasts. But I look forward, Brooke, to continuing our conversation offline and recorded for the people to enjoy later.
excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. It was awesome. You rock.
My my pleasure. Likewise.
Take care.